Welcome to our sister chat for Life Interrupted, a documentary film featuring empowering stories of three breast cancer survivors told through their bravery and will to hit cancer head on. I'm Shauna Davis, Senior Program Director at the Black Women's Health Imperative, and I will be your host today. The Black Women's Health Imperative is proud to partner with the network of the National Library of Medicine and the All of Us Research Program to increase awareness and understanding of the broad impact of breast cancer on communities that have higher rates of illness and are underrepresented in biomedical research. We hope you had an opportunity to watch this powerful film and that you're ready to join an engaging conversation with our panelists. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you entered the Zoom platform, you were muted and will continue to be muted throughout the event. To engage with our interactive panel, please use the Q&A chat feature located on your toolbar below. The chat will be monitored throughout the discussion, so please don't be shy to ask questions. The panelists will respond to as many of them as possible. Closed captioning is also available during today's program. To access it, please navigate to the Zoom toolbar below and look for the CC icon. And if you need any technical assistance during the program, please message the team through the Q&A feature. Before we begin our talk, I want to share that it is definitely an honor to be part of this amazing opportunity with these amazing women for so many women like myself and the women that we support at the Black Women's Health Imperative. We are daughters, sisters, mothers, wives, and friends. And so many of us do not know about the importance of being involved in biomedical research. And our job today, and my job, is to provide information for them to learn and advocate for themselves, like the courageous women in Life Interrupted. I was in awe of these women and their transparent drive to combat cancer head on and with all of their will and their might. Life Interrupted tells the story of how personal and varied breast cancer journeys are. And this is true for every health condition. This is why the All of Us Research Program wants to arm its participants with health information that can inform them and their future generations with specific details about their DNA that will hopefully allow them to make critical decisions about their health. I am a participant, and it was easy for me to enroll. I had the option to give as much or as little information as I wanted to. In addition, the health information I will receive, I want to be part of the database that's being built, the diverse database that's being built through this program, so that I can hopefully impact positively the creation of pharmaceuticals and treatments that make sense for me and people with similar DNA to myself. I hope you will walk away from this program with a better understanding and that it will be a catalyst for positive change in research. And I want you to also understand why it's so important that communities who are underrepresented in biomedical research have an opportunity to contribute and to benefit from health studies. So let's meet our amazing panelists. Our first panelist, Dr. Katana Parker-Lamia, is a scientist who studied breast cancer and prostate cancer for nearly 20 years. She has been published numerous times and has been funded by state and national governments in her work to better understand factors that promote metastasis of breast and prostate cancer in Black and Brown communities. She is an associate professor in the College of Pharmacy at Xavier University of Louisiana, is co-chair of the Community Advisory Board for the All of Us Research Program, and was recently listed as one of the most inspiring Black scientists in America. Welcome, Dr. Lamia.
Pleasure.
Our next panelist is a nonprofit marketing maven by day and a breast cancer baddie by night. Jasmine Sowers is a co-founder of For the Breast of Us, the first inclusive breast cancer community for all women of color. Thank you for joining us today, Jasmine.
Thank you for having me.
And last, but certainly not least, Director of Life Interrupted. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, educator, and PBS consultant who is a two-time breast cancer thriver. Paula, Life Interrupted is a phenomenal, transparent journey about breast cancer and the courageous women who fight it each day. Will you tell our viewers a little bit about what inspired you to make such a transparent, intimate, and empowering film?
Well, I want to thank you for your wonderful introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here today with this great panel and the audience. So I was a documentary filmmaker way before I was a breast cancer survivor. And I knew the power of storytelling and how transformative it could be for an audience to experience. So a few months after my first diagnosis, a filmmaker friend of mine called me and said, well, you know, you've got to do a film about this. And knowing how much time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears goes into an independent film, my immediate reaction was absolutely not. I'm not making a film about this. I just want to take my diagnosis. I want to research what I need to know. I'm going to get all the answers right and just get through this as quick as possible. And so as things happen with film and also with cancer, things are not always so straightforward. I worked on my diagnosis. I realized that things were not going to happen immediately, that things were not binary. And at the same time, I was able to kind of catch my breath and realize that maybe I could consider doing a film, but I was not interested in just documenting my own experience. I actually never wanted to be in the film, but I was interested in documenting other women, knowing that it would be helpful to me as I was going through my journey, and hopefully helpful to other women as they could watch the film. As a filmmaker, I always need a couple of good ideas to get me going. And so I came across two ideas that I thought were really interesting. One size does not fit all, and breast cancer does not discriminate. However, access to health care does, and we're going to be talking about that during this discussion. So I wanted to share the stories of women who had gone on this journey before us, and it was important to me to include the process of diagnosis, treatment, beyond treatment, medical information, and the psychological impacts of what happens. I wanted to kind of give the whole picture. It's not a singular, situation. And I do know that this is something that no matter who you are, if you're a breast cancer survivor, you reach all of those touchstones. I wanted to use the film to orient people to the authentic experience of breast cancer, that it's a harsh reality for most of us. And at times it's not neat and tidy, as I said before. I want to validate survivors' experiences so that they can see themselves, and when things are not going straight and tidy, they realize it's not them, it's just part of the process, because I think a lot of us take it very personally if things go south. And I also wanted to empower patients to be proactive in their treatment decisions. You know, there's a huge universe of information and ongoing science out there. And it's, you know, if we can get involved, I think that, you know, we're going to have a better outcome. I also wanted to help providers to treat the patient and not just the disease, that we are survivors and thrivers, and we're real people with real lives.
Right.
And to also give family members, friends, advocates a sense of what living with a breast cancer diagnosis is truly like. So, you know, as I was going through this and people wanted to help or they didn't understand, I wanted to, you know, give a real, this is kind of what it's like, or, you know, these are some of the things that may happen. And I just wanted to emphasize, I never wanted to be in the film. And I went out looking for other people. I found some wonderful characters in Debbie and Pat, and they were very generous and shared their story with me. At the same time, my situation just was going south. And so, I had access to me, and I'm a practical filmmaker, and I thought, okay, I'll make sure I film this, but I'm going to just tuck it away in the end because I don't think I'm that interesting. And, you know, I really want to focus on other people. Well, as my situation got more and more dire, and Debbie in particular was very open and shared pretty much anything with me. I mean, she took me into her church, she took me to her family, she took me into her hospital. But as my stuff got really crazy and I went through different surgeries and infections and all that, I realized that it was important to, I did not ethically want to show something that I wasn't willing to show myself. And I wanted to explain that because I went through that a lot when I was going through the film. And so even though I wanted it to be about other people, ethically, I felt like I should insert myself in there for that reason. So that's what I did. And in the very end, when I went through thousands of hours of editing and footage, I can tell you it was extremely painful to have to look at myself. Most of us have a hard time just listening to ourselves or looking at selfies or whatever. And imagine having to look at that stuff for hours and hours and weeks. And I had to become another person. I had to say that Paula person. You know, when I was working with people, they couldn't say, hey, you are blah, 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 because it would just take me down the rabbit hole.
Wow.
So I wanted to give a little background on how that happened. And I went with my gut. I tried to make something as honest as possible and hope that that would resonate for people. So that's the answer.
Well, I will tell you, friends of mine who have also seen this film and even our panel, we've talked about just the authenticity of the stories. I certainly walked away from my first viewing saying, wow, I've had a lot of family members with cancer. I thought I knew cancer, and I realized that I didn't know cancer after seeing your film. You know, and so I think this is a really great transition to Dr. Lamia about this concept of precision medicine. So precision medicine was involved in the decisions made by the medical team and the women who are in this film. For those of us who may not know, you know, what is precision medicine? How does it play a role in how the women in the film and you know, individuals with other diseases, illnesses are treated each day?
So first, I want to say thank you to Shana and to Paula for the introduction, and certainly Paula for such a gripping revelation and authentic journey that you shared with your viewing audience. So thank you for that. I'll start with precision medicine, which is each of us has a unique DNA sequence. And so your DNA tells the story. It makes you who you are, your eye color from your head to your toes. And now with that said, taking that same DNA and using it to tell us. So now that if you've been diagnosed with breast cancer, Now tell us what kind of gene expression or protein expression is there. That informs now the doctor how to treat the patient. So in a snapshot with respect to breast cancer, that is what is done. And precision medicine is evolving in such a way that it's not just limited to breast cancer, but it's, or cancer period. It's becoming more of a script, because it is a series of letters. So more of a script to inform the healthcare team on how to treat a particular patient.
Now, Jasmine, coming off of that idea that Dr. Lamia shared around precision medicine, you know, we know that the three women that were profiled in the film were of different ages, different ethnicities. In your work each day, you are partnering with women, supporting women who come from all walks of life, who have varying backgrounds. Will you share your perspective as a supporter, an advocate, a breast cancer thriver, on how differences help us understand some of the vagaries of breast cancer? I think Paula mentioned that one size doesn't fit all. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts about that.
I think that's a great question. And I talked to Paula about this before. I had the honor of being able to review the film. And I wrote a blog about how it really emphasized the importance of treating people, not patients, and recognizing that we are people before we become a patient. I think one of the great examples of that was considering, and Pat's story, Pat talked about in her culture how her son, like it's not customary for the son to help the mother in that way. And so she didn't really have a support system. But a doctor not understanding that culture is like, you have somebody at home. I know that person's at home and they can help you. Taking into consideration things like the distance. When we talk about leading a community for women of color, the first thing that we talk about is typically the difference between the care and the access that white patients have over minority patients. But then you can also get down to what happens when you're in different geographies. What happens when you have different economic privileges than other people in your community. For the rest of us is right now embarking on our first research project, and it actually is around race and culture, perception of clinical trials. And the goal is for us to understand what are the best ways that we can communicate to our communities, the importance of participating in clinical trials and understanding what those barriers are. And as we are getting towards the survey part, I'll tell you just in the conversation, some of the eye-opening things that have come out are things like Black patients feeling like they should go to, and this is a quote, the rinky-dink hospitals, the more community-based hospitals, because they're more likely to see people that look like them. Observation from some of the Asian patients is they typically had a better perception of doctors because they tend to have more doctors and medical professionals in their families. So it's those kinds of nuances and understanding how, and language, oh my goodness, language is such a huge barrier for Latina patients, for Native American, Indigenous patients. Those kinds of things really do impact people's ability to navigate the healthcare system. And that's just from the patient's perspective. When you start to dig into things like implicit bias, the fact that doctors can have, and there's a study when the only thing changed between a case was the race of the patient, the Black patient got the less effective cancer treatment. Now that's something a patient can't solve for, but that's a challenge that they're going to have to navigate in the healthcare system.
Right, right. So the theme of like ancestry, familial comfort was something that kind of jumped out in the film for me. So, you know, we're talking about precision medicine. We're here today in support of and supported by the All of Us research program. And this is a program that hopefully will put participants in a position where they can learn a lot about their DNA and how their DNA impacts how they will make decisions around their healthcare. So this next question is for Paula and Dr. Lamia. And Paula, so you shared an illustration of your family tree, and you talked about your ancestry. Can you tell a little bit about what you learned about your ancestry and how you may have been more prone to breast cancer? And I'll add the follow-up with that as well. And what does this say about our ancestry and its potential connection to serious illnesses?
Right. So it was a very short family tree. But that was done because in my process of trying to figure out if I should get a lumpectomy or a mastectomy the first time around, that was one of the guides that we were using to try and, get more information. I knew that my mother had breast cancer because I was around when she did. And, but besides her, there wasn't any other breast cancer in the tree. However, as typical with Ashkenazi Jews, which I am, from a very, very long line, the BRCA gene is more common in Ashkenazi Jews. And so given that, that was another factor that we took into account when we were trying to figure out the pieces. This was not something that was, one of those binary or situations. It was, collecting the information and trying to make the best decision possible. I'd be curious to know what you think about that.
That's really a very important piece of the puzzle. In fact, all of us have a BRCA gene. The question is, do you have a mutation in your BRCA gene? And so that's very well documented as far as knowing that region. So you indicated that there are certain populations who are more prone to having this particular mutation, and that's precision medicine. This is where the DNA gives us information to guide us on how to treat a patient, whether it's, you mentioned surgery. I know that there are different pharmaceutical approaches that one would take if one has early stage with estrogen receptor or progesterone receptor, the HER2 new receptors. Those are called targeted therapies, and they are very breast cancer is considered to be the gold standard as far as disease modalities and treatment of any disease. So that said, I think that breast cancer is probably one of the most studied and heavily investigated areas in as far as precision medicine goes. So to that point, knowing our family history, when you go to the physician, you fill out all those forms each year for your annual exams for those who have access to a primary care physician. And they always ask, did your mom, did your dad, your brother, or your sister? We call them first degree family members. Those that are going to be, that you either came directly from your parents, that you came alongside your siblings, or that you gave birth to, and that would be children. So those are the first degree family members. And so based upon their health, there are certain predictors that can be associated with one's susceptibility to certain disease, which means that given that, and I'll use you, Paula, since you're the subject, one of the key subjects of the film, since your mom was, you indicated had breast cancer, then it puts you at higher risk. Does that say that Paula absolutely would have breast cancer in her life? Not necessarily, but it does put you at a higher risk. And that goes for anyone else. So to Jasmine's point, in my mind, if that information is available to you, now we talk about the young non-traditional, outside of the guideline, that is at 40 years old when you have the mammogram. That's what the guidance says. That's what the guideline says. Now, if Jasmine, for example, knows that her mom had breast cancer, then Jasmine can advocate for herself to say, hey, to her physician, I need to be tested earlier. I need to be tested earlier for my mammogram because I know I have there's a history of breast cancer with my mom or my sister or my daughter. And so that's one of the things that's very empowering. You don't have to wait until you're sick or have a situation to say, hey, I need you to do this extra check. You can say, I know that I have these things in my immediate family tree, and therefore I need you to pay attention to that. I need you, is there an extra test for that? What do I need to do prophylactically, that is preventatively, to prevent the onset of this thing? So that is one of the things I find that is very empowering. But as you said, I think you used the term, Paula, earlier, giving agency. Part of the agency that one, as the, I don't want to say patient, but as the people or as the participant has, is to do the work to know your own family history. So know your family medical history so that you can have some sense as to what you might need to pay attention to, and also help guide your physician as to how he or she can best take care of you, because this is a joint effort. It's not, it doesn't belong to one or the other. It really is a collaborative approach to taking care of one's overall health.
Can I ask one question of you? Can you address BRCA in African American population?
Sure.
Do you have any points to make on that?
That's a good question. So BRCA, for those who don't know, the BRCA is a region, it's a specific region on the DNA. So it's not unique for one population or the other population. We all have it. Now, what we do know is that, what the data tells us is that there are certain Jewish communities, as you mentioned, Paula, that have a higher incidence of what they call a mutation in a specific region. It's called a hotspot. So the literature will call it a hotspot, Shania, where they're looking at a specific piece or region on the DNA that has a tendency to be out of whack. And so it codes wrongly for certain proteins, and now that can lead to certain cancers. Now, relative to other ethnic populations, is it found in other minority communities? Yes, but not as highly as it's found in others. So there is believed to be that there are other triggers that are associated with breast disease in other populations. And since you mentioned African American, it's believed that there are certain other triggers. Environmental. There are certain foods. Obesity is certainly one of the risk factors. That's a key one now that they're looking at, and they're calling them metabolic syndromes, where one has chronic disease over a period of time. And most chronic diseases, Paula, are associated with inflammation. Anytime you have chronic inflammation, whether it's hypertension, that's associated with inflammation, or diabetes associated with inflammation, or any cancer associated with inflammation, any kind of heart disease, those things will predispose you or make you now at higher risk for any of the other conditions that we've talked about. So check any one of the boxes, Paula. Any one of the boxes can actually predispose you to this type of thing.
And Dr.
Or make you at
Katana,
higher risk.
I believe the BRCA gene was actually found to be more prevalent among Nigerians as well. And some of the latest research, and we're For the Breast with Partners with Force, and so we have access to a lot of the research and things that come through. And I did saw that, and I think a couple of great points that you mentioned is one, when you think of genetic mutations. So I did one of those 23andMe things. I came back 40% Nigerian, and I looked at my parents and went, which one of you? Who is it? Breast cancer is very heavy on my mother's side. My mother, thank God, has not had breast cancer, but she never has to deal with it. My grandmother, she's on her third round. This last time metastatic. Several of her sisters have had breast cancer. I tested negative for the genetic mutations. But one of the things you mentioned is that just because you don't test positive for a genetic mutation does not mean that you're not at an increased risk. So I don't have genetic mutation, even though I was diagnosed really early, but there's chances are that there's a gene that has not been discovered yet. And so I'm still excited, happy that I've gotten the genetic testing done. But as far as for my mother and I almost called her my daughter, my sister, they now have that information. So they got the results back and said that you are at increased risk, you need to do more screenings, and that information that me taking that step is going to benefit them and empower them to make better decisions for themselves. And the other thing that you mentioned is this idea of joint effort. You know, we talk very heavily, we call them the breast cancer baddies is what our community is called. So very heavily among the baddies about shared decision making. And the only way that you can make shared decisions or engage in a joint effort is if you have the information. So that again calls to being proactive, like Paula said, and making sure that you can educate yourself as much as you can and ask questions as often as possible so that you understand why the decisions being made are being made.
And you, thank you for that. And Jasmine, you raised some very important points about being part of Nigerian. So there have been some studies that have been done that have actually, Paula, you'll appreciate this, that have looked at genotyping and striated folks into groups of European American, African, and African American. And this is with respect to stress or inflammatory mediators, which are precursors to underlying chronic disease. And what they found was amongst the cohorts that they looked at, African Americans expressed more inflammatory mediators, which as compared to Africans, Europeans, and European Americans. And so taken together, it now predisposes your African Americans, it makes them more vulnerable to chronic disease. And I think that is the takeaway, if nothing else, and talk about disease management, holistic health. So I know we're here talking about precision medicine relative to breast cancer. And so I don't want to lose sight of that. But we also want to remind potential participants in the All of Us research program, how to live your best life in holistic health. There's some things we talk about. I'm going to use your term again, Paula, having agency for your health. Mm-hmm. There's certain things your grandmother told you. Eat your green and leafies. I just read a report today that 2 is at a minimum. 5 is really where the gold bar is, that are prophylactic, as far as fruits and vegetables per day. So that just came out in an NIH report today. There are certain things, Paula, that help us to take agency for ourselves. You know, you need to drink your 8 glasses of water. Let's get the water in. Let's get the steps in. So there are things to give you agency to reduce your overall risk for any type of chronic health disease. And you know, and that includes cancer. So there are a number of studies, Paula, we want to talk about breast cancer. There are a number of studies that have shown berries, the superfood, blueberries ranking number 1 in a number of studies, but your strawberries and blackberries, the dark berries, typically are going to provide you with more of the vitamins and what we're calling free scavengers. So and I don't want to get too technical here, but everybody takes a vitamin. Everybody's taking that Women's Day or whatever the multivitamin that it is that you're needing to take. Why are you taking a vitamin D? Great question. You're taking it because it's loaded with something called antioxidants. We've heard that term because we put it in the skincare to prevent aging. But also what you're really doing is feeding your body things that are going to eat any or dissolve or neutralize any particular biochemicals that as a result of your regular metabolism as we walk and we breathe and do all these things. And it's going to neutralize those things that can do cellular damage. And as a result, those are called prophylactics. So now I'm preventing aging and I'm preventing all of these things. And so you're also, what you're really preventing is cellular damage. And so we're doing certain things because we know that we think it's the right thing to do, but you're really helping your body in so many other ways. And so, so I just want to encourage people, I call it medicinal food, by eating a balanced diet, taking those vitamins and drinking the water is absolutely essential. And I don't know, and I would ask, either of you, the both of you, I don't know about on your journey. I don't remember that being part of the story, but did you find it empowering as far as I saw Pat Bear in the film, she would go out for long walks. That was the thing she did. And typically she liked to do these walks, it was by herself in these vast open spaces. And so was there anything you did for your own self-care during your journeys?
Jazz?
So for me, I definitely probably engage more of a mental care, more mental self-care than I did with physical, because I was super tired, and I was just in a lot of pain from the bilateral mastectomy towards the end of radiation to having multiple infections, being constantly hospitalized. Like it was a lot for a couple of years, even after active treatment. My body just had a really hard time recovering. But for me, once I got over like some of this physical stuff, it's just going to happen. I'm going to be uncomfortable. For me, it definitely took a lot more mentally and spiritually to engage and to take care, which is stress management. What's interesting is it was the National Breast Cancer Coalition conference. They talked about how faith builds resiliency, especially among Black women and Latino women. And so like, as I learned more of this information, for me, that's absolutely true. I definitely don't know how I could have made it without like really digging deep in there. But as I learned these things, and I'm learning about post-traumatic growth, I'm learning about how to educate the women in my community to take on those things, in addition to nutrition and health and fitness. But sometimes I think we really undervalue the importance of having a good mental and spiritual life during traumatic experiences.
And I would say for me, getting outside and being active is my go-to. So, and I know it's different for everybody. When I did radiation and chemo, I got out and hiked and biked every day. I walked to the radiation and the chemo. I was trying to take control, as best I could. And I'd say I was really good at that. I also was pretty mindful about eating protein because I knew things were breaking down. And then later on, I did a lot of work with meditation and also journaling. And I continue to do those. And yeah, I would say this is not a one and done or 10 and done. It is an ongoing journey. I mean, this is my life journey, and it may be excelled because of the cancer, but these are things that I found that I will continue to do.
How have you, there's so much contradicting information sometimes. Eat meat, don't eat meat. How have you, like, now in our Facebook group now, one of the girls is asking the questions about soy, and I'm like, oh no, here we go. How do you navigate that? For me, like when I changed my diet, it was more so I went to an integrative health doctor. And after starting hormone therapy, Lupron, like I packed on 20 pounds really quickly. And like the working out was not doing it. The eating actually helped bring that down. So how have you tried to navigate all the different kind of information out there about what you should and should not eat?
You asking me or the doctor?
I'm asking you how you personally navigated that.
I get into it. I read, and sometimes I think I have a pretty basic. I've been a vegetarian, as the movie says, all my life, and I try to eat, fruits and vegetables. I believe in that thing about eating close to the bottom of the food chain and lots of colors. The soy thing I think is hilarious just because it's so confusing. So I hear you on that one. And You know, I try and follow stuff, but sometimes I just take a break because I do feel like there's a lot of conflicting information. And I'd like to know what the doctor has to say about that. But so I don't know if I answered your question. I read stuff, I follow things. I listen to friends who've had cancer. I try and follow myself. I tried to do seeing some holistic doctors and stuff, didn't have great experience with that. So that's kind of where I'm at. I don't have a great.
Let me jump in and ask a question before Dr. Lamia responds, because it touches on your point, Paula. So we had a couple of conversations about access and how where you live impacts the treatments, the decisions that you make. We're having conversations about foods that boost your immune system, and in some regard that to be able to even talk about that is a privilege. And it's about health literacy. And so we know that we're talking about research, we're talking about access, and there's a history in this country that really has created some mistrust in general about what you read, what you hear, mistrust of biomedical research programs. And we also know that access to information, so health literacy, the understanding that as a patient you can work with your physician as your partner. And then just the basic things that some of us quote unquote take for granted. Pat had to get on an airplane to get the treatment that she needed because it wasn't immediately available in her community. So Dr. Lamia, can you share a little bit with us about your thoughts on how AOU is working to decrease these gaps in health information, health equity, and how all of this impacts the fact that Black women have the highest incidence of breast cancer, and they're also the ones that, comparatively speaking, are surviving the least. So how does all of this kind of play into what we're talking about today?
That's a great question. And so I'll make one comment. So actually, Caucasian women are actually diagnosed more frequently with breast cancer, but African-American women, it's more lethal for that subpopulation of patients. So, and they're typically diagnosed earlier with advanced disease. And so when there were a number of things that were stripped away, when all of that was reconciled with respect to access, with respect to insurance, education, all of those things, there are disparities in levels of treatment. Jasmine alluded to this earlier. The same treatments are not offered to all patients. Outcomes are very poor. As a matter of fact, that in the journal today, in one of my NIH readings, it talked about African-American women in particular advocating for their health and dying as physicians with COVID, as physicians with childcare, and they actually calling and knowing the vernacular, knowing the language, and yet succumbing to disease because they do not receive adequate care. So I think it was said earlier by Jasmine, you can't really fix that. You have to call it out. But how do you fix something called systemic racism, which is something that's a whole bear on its own that merits another conversation. But more in the immediate right now, what can all of us do as far as the All of Us research program? The goal, really, this precision medicine initiative is to be inclusive, to include African American participants so that we can, because right now, when I look at the genomic data, and it was interesting, Jasmine mentioned 23andMe, there was a study that came out, I guess about a year and a half ago, where it talked about these, it's called consumer genomics. So genomics kits, and there are over 3,000 different companies. So it's not just those that you may have seen in a commercial, it's over 3,000. That said, it talked about there being a great lack of trans ethnic diversity.
Yes.
Less than 4% diverse. That is big. That is huge. And so then it begs the question, so who are we making drugs for anyway? Or who's going to benefit from this information anyway? Great question, which is why there is the All of Us research program that where the goal is to be inclusive and to diversify the gene pool. That's what it boils down to, Shana, is to diversify the gene pool so that everybody's, if you will, genes are on the table. Or in the database, so that everyone gets equal consideration for discovery, for diagnostics, for therapeutics. And so, but if you're not in the gene pool, then whoever is will be the one to benefit. So if you don't show up, Shana, you're going to be left behind. And so that is what the bottom line is with this big initiative. And I have to also say, when Jasmine mentioned earlier, hesitancy around a whole lot of things. You know, we have to get off of shaming people for hesitating. We have a right. If you ask people to be involved and you give people quality, and that includes African Americans, if you give me quality information, if you give me the data and allow me to choose or not, then you give me choice. I'm entitled to the right to participate or not to participate. But the goal of this program is, or should be, to give information, to educate people and pull down the blinders, no smoke and mirror, don't make it complicated, don't hide the info, but give me authentic information where I can choose to participate, and give me the pros and the cons of both of it. And then acknowledgement. I think one of the things that prohibits, it's a whole big, I'm going to shame you because you don't want to participate, and not acknowledging the legitimacy of the hesitancy. There were real crimes. There were crimes that were committed against populations of people that we don't want to acknowledge. It was criminal what was done to those people. And so for us to devalue that, to ignore what happened, to not own that, and to speak to that, then we have done a disservice. And we're talking about building trust. Part of the trust is restoration of relationship, is building relationship, so that, like Paula, we can have agency. With Jasmine, we're not just patients, we are people, and we're not guinea pigs, because the honest truth is, at one point we were. And as ugly as that is to say, that is articulating the truth of the matter. And African Americans haven't been the only populations of people who have been targeted, but certainly in this country, that is who's been exploited. And so that said, speaking to the hesitancy, I mean, you got to address the elephant in the room. And until we address that, and not as, put a comma and just keep on talking on to the next thing. Oh, by the way, I need you to sign up for this study. Here's how you sign up. No. Let's park there for a moment and do the work to understand how you are going to convince a community that has historically not been absent from biomedical research, but been abused by it, exploited by it.
And say, show up. Come on.
Now show up.
We actually,
that's the work we have to do, to really engage people who want to be engaged, who want to be informed. And so I'll stop there, but I think we have to get away from the shaming. We have to get away from classifying it something where, oh, they just don't want to participate. We have to get around where they don't understand. we have to get over that, and we have to own what has happened, and articulating that, where, you know, and when you go into any criminal court and they have someone on trial for murder, and that person is anything you want to say, that they give the family an opportunity that has lost a loved one to this crime, to say to the accuser what you've done and how you stole this person for us. They give the criminal an opportunity to make amends. It's some fence mending that needs to take place. And for us to not include that as part of this conversation, and then wonder why we don't have, you know, why we're still challenged with getting folks to sign up, then it gives me pause. It gives me pause.
We have, for the rest of us, we have what we call an accomplished training. And it was really more of an educational opportunity to talk to people that wanted to help women of color that weren't women of color. And a lot of the conversation is like, they're like, you're opening doors that maybe we don't have access to, that kinds of things. But the very basics of that training and understanding health disparities, legit, we took history all the way back to slavery. We like in the experimentation and the foundation of gynecology, and then even going into the sterilization of Latinas, the forced sterilization of Latinas and Native American and Asians in the United States. And so absolutely all of those things, you can, there's very legitimate reasons why people are not participating. For the rest of us, we look at the research, we look at those things, and then we say, well, how can we change this? How can we change your perspective? As we're looking at the research and we see that women that are talking about why they don't participate in clinical trials, how can you participate in a clinical trial if you're offered, you're afraid that you'll get the placebo? If you're afraid that you'll get, or not the placebo, they're afraid the placebo is not medicine, right? So how can you participate if you don't understand what's being tested or how they're being tested? You're not going to. Even down to like the conversations with the COVID vaccine. One of the things I talked about was how culturally insensitive I felt the conversations were, especially when they said that the placebo was saline, and there were people going, duh, it's saline. And I said, well, if you're Black and you don't understand how clinical trials work, duh, saline sounds very Tuskegee-ish to me. But if you're a Latina, then maybe that's like, oh gosh, at least it wasn't something worse than what we thought. You know what I mean? And it's those kinds of nuances that I don't think are being taken into consideration, that for the rest of us are trying to help elevate as we participate in these different types of advocacy programs, but then also just very individually in our communities, education is key. So we're not just going to acknowledge that some really horrible things happen, and they happened not that long ago, because Tuskegee, I think, was the 60s when it closed. People really think like there's this huge time gap. And we're saying this is what's changed since then, right? So you're acknowledging this is what happened. This is how it's different. This is why you can trust it now. This is why they couldn't trust it then. People are skipping that whole education piece. Even with the COVID vaccine, I personally had to do a whole lot of being a research advocate. I've done several research trainings. I needed to understand why you guys were saying that it was safe after 2 months. I need to understand that. The media seemed to be more interested in showing that it was safe for celebrities, but they weren't really willing to understand the education and the information piece of that. And I think that conversation, like Dr. Katana has said, it needs to be had if we want to increase representation for communities of color.
I'm inclined to agree with what you've
Yeah, absolutely. We had an amazing conversation. I just want to, we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to just honor our viewers and get a couple other questions in. So the first is for Paula. In the time since you completed the film, has your perspective about your journey in making the film and dealing with your diagnosis changed? If so, would you add anything to the film, knowing that others viewing it will be impacted? So I'm going to give them both. So that's the first question. And then the second question, what are the best vitamins to take? So think about those two. Paula, tell us where you are with everything.
Right. Well, you know, this conversation where we're at now is really interesting because I intuitively knew about access or lack thereof of access to healthcare, and I thought that was important. And then, you know, I think if I were to continue on, I would make that more of an issue. I mean, I think it was exemplified in the stories, certainly with Pat living, you know, rurally out and having, you know, healthcare not right there. I think I'm so fascinated by all the young women who are, I mean, I think Jasmine is, you know, emblematic of so many women who are at a very young age getting this, you know, why is that happening? And I also find them speaking out, being vocal, also being visual, particularly on social media, showing their scars, showing their tattoos. I just think all of that's very empowering. So I guess you know, am moving more. When I did some stuff with tattoos in the film, and I feel like I would want to even move further in that direction. Yeah. And what kind of vitamins do I take? I mean, I take a good multivitamin, and then I also take vitamin C, and I take vitamin D, and biotin for hair. But I also believe that the best way to get is if you can get it in your food too. I'm not somebody who thinks, you know, I'm just going to take vitamins. So I want to be brief because I know we don't have a lot of time.
Dr. Lamia, anything you want to add to that last piece? Vitamins.
Absolutely. I think a good multivitamin, certainly your vitamin C is going to be a free radical, and cold flu season, that's always going to be good. And certainly vitamin D, and just in case you didn't know, it's not in its active form when you take it, whether you get it through food or through a supplement. You must get 15 minutes of sunlight every day. So Paula, those bike rides, Jasmine, those walks, just being outdoors, absolutely essential for overall health. So I think you're doing the right things. I think the things that you all are taking, the approach, your attitude is, you all have such upbeat attitudes, and and that is to be commended, because that also sets the tone for reducing stress, and also allowing your body to optimize all the good things that you're giving it, the air, the food, the water, and all of those things. So I have to just applaud you all, because your attitude is something about the attitude that sets the tone for one's overall well-being. So keep shining, ladies, keep shining. You're doing a beautiful job.
And just to say, it's not sunshine every day. You know, we have our ups, we have our downs. I think it's just, you kind of got to pick yourself up every morning or every week and just, you know, get going at it. But there are certainly lots of crying moments in life. And I think as a breast cancer survivor, I just want to make sure that I'm reaching out to people. You know, it's a shit show sometimes, and you got to accept that too.
Very quickly, that's one of the things, I think I've mentioned this before on one of our panels. It's one of the things I really appreciated about the film, because, you know, in the nonprofit world, breast cancer it's almost glamorized in a sense. And you have the bill and they're all smiling and it's all great. And then people expect you to like go back to who you were and just be happy. But life is really different after a diagnosis. Life is really different after active treatment. And I think the honesty that you showed and all of those different feelings, and not necessarily like, we're happy to be alive, but we're dealing with some serious collateral damage. You know what I mean? I so appreciated that authenticity in the film.
Well, ladies, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your experiences, your wisdom with our viewers. And I also want to thank our viewers for being here and attending this just really engaging and enlightening sister talk. This program, as I said earlier, was made possible in partnership with the National Library of Medicine, the Network of National Library of Medicine, and the All of Us Research Program. Before you go, we definitely want your feedback on the program, and so you'll end up getting a link. It'll take 2 minutes. We appreciate you providing us with your thoughts on today. And to learn more about the All of Us Research Program, please visit joinallofus.org/NLM. So joinallofus.org/NLM. And ladies, thank you so much. I just really appreciate these conversations because I learn so much every time I'm able to do this. And I just, I appreciate your support, and I appreciate your willingness to work with the Black Women's Health Imperative to make sure we're getting this extremely important information out. So thank you, take care, enjoy the sun. Daylight savings starts this weekend, amen. I become a new person when that happens. So have a wonderful day, and thank you very much. And our viewers, thank you as well, and be well. Thank you.